Hey climbers, welcome back to another episode of Climb by VSC, a weekly show covering the most exciting developments in the world of climate innovation. My name is Vijay Kapoor, General Partner of VSC Ventures and co-host of Climb. Every week, I or a member of our VSC team will speak with a pioneer in the climate tech world about emerging technologies and novel ideas that will turn the tide on climate change. We've heard enough of the doom and gloom. It's time for stories about purpose-driven innovation that lead to sustainable, positive change. Today's episode is a very unique one. We have our first government official on Climb. My partner Vijay Chattha speaks to Janelle Kellman, who is the mayor of Sausalito, California, and the founder of the Center for CSRS Solutions. Janelle is an environmental lawyer and an entrepreneur, and she is a font of wisdom on so many topics, so I can't wait for all of you to hear this conversation. I'm so happy that you've decided to join us. Now, let's climb.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Climb, where we bring in experts, founders, investors, and company builders that are on the forefront of battling climate change through innovation. And very excited today to have one of our newest friends in the space, Janelle Kellman. Janelle wears multiple hats. She's a startup CEO, founder, and mayor of Sausalito. And she has been an advisor to many startups across different technologies. Her organization, the Center for CSRS Solutions, is a global nonprofit focused on empowering local decision makers to take action around sea level rise and coastal resilience. So really excited to have you on, Janelle. I don't think we've had somebody on yet that has such diverse roles and responsibilities in this sort of world and changing climate that we have. So thank you for joining, first of all.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks to the whole team. I met you guys at an event where I was on a panel and immediately excited to enter into this group and learn from you all. So, hats off. I listened to a bunch of your other podcasts on my runs this week in prep, and they're fantastic. So appreciate you having me on.
All right. This will be the best one. That's the goal.
Okay. Looking for it.
Thank you. So, all right. Well, let's talk about your background. Let's talk about you started as sort of an environmental lawyer and what sort of taken you from that path to where you are now.
Yeah, I actually might even need to go a little deeper because I think the one thing that really carves out who I am as a person is I'm a lifelong team athlete. I played 4 team sports in high school, 2 Division I college, and everything about the way I approach a problem is oriented towards a team. Part of that has to do with the fact that I always played defense. So I could make you not lose the game, but I couldn't make you win the game. And so it really teaches you to collaborate and rely on other people. I also am sort of intellectually oriented towards an intellectual buffet, which means I like a lot of different ideas and I like meeting a lot of different people and hearing their thoughts. I already know what I think. So if I can have someone else come to me and educate me and teach me and expand my point of view, I always appreciate it. I went to law school. I grew up on the East Coast, came out to Stanford for law school, wanted to be an environmental lawyer, practiced for 15 years. I was in private practice. I was at the federal government, EPA Region 9. I worked for a utility. But ultimately, I realized that I wanted to work in an area where I could have vision and I could execute on that vision. And so I had a concept around an e-commerce company and I launched that e-commerce company and very quickly got into technology and tech advising. I did my requisite rabbit hole on cryptocurrency and blockchain and really enjoyed that space for a long time. But I had always been involved. I've been in Sausalito for 21 years. And of that 21 years, I had spent 10 years on and off our planning commission. And that's the quasi-governmental body where if you want to do something to your house, you want to build something new, you're a new business and you want to launch a new sign, you come before us. And so I got to see all the on the ground happening in Sausalito. And I got involved with a long range planning process called the General Plan. And that's supposed to plan out for 25 years. And I was blown away that we had no sustainability element. We had no resilience element. And we could talk about how and why those two things are different and important. And we also didn't have a plan of attack for sea level rise and coastal resilience. And so if you know Sausalito, California, we're right around the Golden Gate Bridge, the first city you encounter when you come across the Golden Gate Bridge. And we are a waterfront community. Water on one side, Golden Gate National Recreation Area on the other side, one main thoroughfare in and out with a couple of roads that go back up to the freeway. So I couldn't believe we didn't have a plan. And so I started to ask questions about that plan. And everybody seemed positive towards wanting one, but no one had taken the steps to make it happen yet. And the more questions I asked, more frustrated I got. And the more questions I asked, the more I had people look at me and start saying, well, why don't you do something about it? So oftentimes no good deed goes unpunished. So here I am. I got elected and now I'm the mayor of Sausalito, and I couldn't be prouder and happier to be able to serve my community.
That's awesome. And so let's talk about that nitty gritty, right? So you're in there saying you need a plan. Everyone's like, cool, go make it happen. Now, what does that look like? Is the plan been made? If so, how long did it take? If not, when's it going to be done?
Yeah, really great question. So Sausalito, you may know, has a historic working waterfront called the Marin Ship. And during World War II, we made 93 ships for the Pacific Theater. It's basically us and Long Beach. And in order to build out this waterfront, Bechtel came in and they built out the land on fill. And fill, as you know, liquefies very easily when you have a seismic event. And you have the experience of something called subsidence. So much of our waterfront is sinking, while at the same time the waters are rising. We also have a significant amount of aging infrastructure. And so you may find that a storm drain is below sea level. And so the water will pond instead of draining as it would have 20 years ago. We're seeing this significantly off Highway 101. The Manzanita Park and Ride in Marin County floods regularly. You get what's called sunny day flooding, which is when you have floods from a king tide, even though it's bright sunshine out. So you don't need a storm event necessarily. And so I put together a group, we called it the Sea Level Rise Task Force for Sausalito. I am blessed to have incredible people in this community who are experts in GIS mapping, estuaries, wetlands, nature conservation planning. And we looked at each other and said, man, there's so much information out here. Where do we start? What models do we rely on? What predictions are relevant to us? And it took us about 3 or 4 months to really sort through all the information. And I thought, goodness, if we're having this problem, and I'm an environmental lawyer, and my team is, the best and the brightest volunteers, of course, what happens around the country in smaller communities where they don't have this expertise, where they have competing interests, where they have to worry about putting food on the table, perhaps first and foremost, and rising waters is impacting that. And so I had launched the Center for Sea Rise Solutions to be a nonprofit to look nationally around this area, but I quickly realized it was a global issue. And we've been off and running, trying to empower not just the local Sausalito and San Francisco Bay Area communities, but also communities around the country to figure out how do you support local decision makers who have the political willpower, but may not be able to overcome a number of different roadblocks due to competing priorities.
Yeah, and that makes total sense, right? You're grinding away at it in Sausalito among the smartest minds in the world, right? And how can you scale that impact? I'm just curious, just to step back for 1 second. I think you're the first elected official that I think I've had on this, and we've had a couple for VSC before. But is there any concerns like conflict of interest? I mean, it sounds like it's a value add to everybody that you have some political control here, but you also have all this expertise. Do you have to deal with that, or how does that work out basically?
My whole goal is to empower local decision makers. And so whether I do that with my mayor's hat on or whether I do it representing an NGO, first and foremost, it's about serving others, right? It's not a benefit to me. The NGO is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit. It's not a money-making venture. And so my opportunity, actually being the mayor, gives me the opportunity to reach more people. And that's an opportunity I'm really trying to leverage so that I can get to the table with folks who otherwise might not have the opportunity to return my call if I wasn't the mayor of a town.
That's right. Okay, awesome. So one thing you mentioned to me when we talked earlier was this idea that a lot of climate tech companies, startups pitch you as sort of somebody that could you do a trial? Could we do a demo to see how this works? What's that experience been like? And secondly, what could you give as advice to founders seeking to do these kind of partnerships?
Yeah, I actually think working with the public sector is a completely untapped and important aspect of climate tech. We know that there's tons of technology coming out that can be deployed in the private sector. There's wonderful innovations around that. But you really need to get communities and individuals to adopt some of these new ways of being, because a lot of them are behavioral changes. And so over the past election cycle, I was really excited because I was able to sort of develop kind of what I call a connecting of the dots between local, district, state, and federal decision makers. So I got heavily involved on 2 campaigns, one for Marin Municipal Water District, another for California State Assembly. And both of those campaigns were supported by our Congressman, Jared Huffman. And all 4 of us were deep, deep climate activists who wanted to make a change, but we could pull and push levers at different stages of that deal flow, if you will. I don't know if you can see, I just made air quotes as to deal flow. I apply a lot of sort of entrepreneurial expectations around how to make this happen and how to prove product market fit. But one of the things that we were able to do is to say, okay, who's in charge of a decision-making at what level, and who's in charge of the flow of funds and at what level? And what is the power and efficiency of uniting our efforts and our vision?
And who is in charge of those things? I mean, if I'm a startup, I know that's a complicated question, but like, did you figure that out? Is that still to be figured out?
I actually think it's still to be figured out. I think that's one of the big problems is that, you hear about all the green infrastructure monies. You hear about the surplus, the $9 billion surplus in the state of California. And I here in Sausalito, and I'm thinking, I'm never going to see $1 of that. And why is that? Because there's so many different layers. It's like a game of telephone. And so one of the things that I think we really need to improve as policymakers and as constituents is to improve the flow of funds to the individuals, the companies, and the municipalities who are supposed to be the intended recipients of those funds. And so as an example, I had some really wonderful mentoring from some friends in San Mateo around sea level rise. They had gotten $8 million from the state for developing a joint power authority and for developing some additional resilience measures around SFO. And I didn't even really realize that I could just go directly to the state and ask for money. And so they helped me craft a request for $4 million. And then I kind of had a campaign, a 6-week campaign of haranguing my state senator, my state assemblyman, because I wanted to access those funds. And I was so proud and delighted to say Assemblyman Levine and State Senator McGuire helped us get $1 million for sea level rise planning and mitigation. And so finally, I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the reason that that's so important is because the grants that you see that municipalities and even individuals can apply for require that projects are shovel ready. And in order for something to be shovel ready, you have to plan for it. You need resources to plan for it. Mm-hmm. So if I don't have $250,000 to do the planning and the engineering and the environmental review, then I actually don't have something that I can put into a grant application. And therefore, right. I never apply for a grant. And this is terrible, unvirtuous
So you need money to get money.
You need money to get money, right?
So how do you do it? Where do you get that $250K from?
Right. Well, so that's part of what I'm trying to do nationally through my NGO is to figure out how do you develop that technical capacity? How do you inspire one another to say, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the way to do it, but just pick up the phone and call and ask for it. And if you don't get the right person on the line, call again and keep going for it. And I have your back. And that, again, sort of harkens back to that team environment that somebody could call me and say, Janelle, how did you do it in Sausalito? And I'll go through it with them. And if they get $1 million for their community, that's a victory for me as well.
I love that. Jumping around a little bit on this connection between the startups and government. The only way to succeed in climate change is to work with governments in many cases. So when you look at the timeline it took, right, for even you to get the $1 million, like how do you think that plays a role as startups think about doing deals with states of California or Nevada? It sounds like it's a longer sales cycle, but are we talking multiple years to close deals? Is anything going faster? Is it slower? Like, how do they? I feel like they project things way too quickly when they take a lot longer.
So there's 2 ways to look at it. One is if you're going to like the California Energy Commission, you're applying for a grant, that could be a multi-year process until you apply, you get picked, and you get the product or the money's dispersed. But the other side of it reminds me of what Sundeep on your prior podcast said about founder market fit. And I think the analogy for government is finding a local champion who can help move things forward, because it shouldn't be that hard. So I'll give an example. We have a company here in Sausalito that develops unique EV chargers. It's called Intertie. They have subterranean battery storage, they have generation, and then they have the EV charger itself. I'm developing and about to release a concept around the new blue economy for Sausalito that evolves our historic working waterfront and focuses on electrification of transportation. Because we know how to make ships, why shouldn't we electrify literally everything? And so these guys who are working on renewable energy applied for a grant, figured out how to do an EV charger for a maritime vessel. And so now we have an EV charger on the waterfront for an electric vessel that might come off the water, as opposed to just something coming on the land, right? And so we were able to do that because I understand the benefit of that. It fits into a policy, and it's something that, from a permitting perspective, was not a heavy lift.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there's a lot of electric boat companies that I've seen out there, and some of them are coming to market. So
yep, they should call Sausalito. Yeah, they should call me, because I want nothing more than to develop a hub of that type of technology, right? In Sonoma, they have a telecom hub. In Nevada, they have a biotech hub. Sausalito, 100%. Let's focus on decarbonization. Let's electrify every aspect, intermodality, every aspect of transportation.
Amazing. If you were governor, okay, I'm just thinking out loud here. You're literally you're in it. You're seeing how things get done. You're seeing how much money the state has. You're seeing the demands. If you're elected governor tomorrow, what would be the top 3 things you would do to move forward this vision?
You know, it's crazy. I actually think about this because I think about what I want from others. It's a trifecta. It's climate, it's jobs, it's housing. How do we account for all 3 of those things in not just a sustainable way, but a regenerative and equitable way? Because a lot of times capitalism can take over and we forget, is this regenerative? Is it sustainable? Is it resilient? These are all really important words that have their own unique meanings. And as we talked about earlier, I'm a little bit obsessed with the meaning of words and the subtext within those words, right? And so I think those 3 things really connect with one another. You can't create new jobs without thinking about climate and about where to house those workers. You can't think about putting in new housing, and the state of California has a really high housing mandate, without also looking at the environmental impacts and what type of jobs will be created. And so you have to look at those 3 things together.
So does that mean you would have let's talk about specifics, right? Let's say you're governor tomorrow. I totally agree with you. Those are 3 great frameworks. Would you do anything differently tactically? Is there like a phone line for climate tech innovation? Would you have sort of a listening tour across states? Would you just instantly unlock money per county that could be accessed at half the speed? Is there anything tactically that could be done better?
I would probably take those three bullet points and do a SWOT analysis on them in major communities to figure out how do you create each of those in a meaningful, sustainable fashion. And not every community is able to sustain and integrate large amounts of housing or a large number of new jobs. Right. So how do you look at that from a local level and then also from a regional level? The other thing you'll laugh, the other thing I joke about that I would do, because, I know what I know, but I don't know what everybody else is thinking. I would love to travel through California playing as many sports as possible, shoot a little one-on-one, get a little game of horse going, maybe try to hit a couple of baseballs in the Central Valley, play some soccer with some kids, get to really just be on the ground. And these conversations that happen when you're in motion with people can be really important.
Love it. You're a gamer. I love gaming. Makes sense.
If you want to be a baller, you got to play ball.
True. Okay, so where does California rank in terms of sense of urgency on climate vis-a-vis other U.S. states?
Top of the list. I mean, Sausalito is just one aspect of this, but the state of California's leadership is sort of full speed ahead on climate. But it comes back to, how do you intertwine this with jobs and housing? How do you make this happen for the entire community, right? And so we look at things like the desalination plants that are being proposed. They could create jobs. They could probably lead to some tax base for some more housing. But from a climate perspective, they're really controversial because they're going to create a lot of briny waste product close to shore, right? But how do we accommodate that? How do you have new housing without more water sources? Conservation is one thing, but do we have to be thinking ahead? So I think California is at the forefront. There's some really amazing projects coming out of San Francisco, coming out of the Port of Los Angeles. San Diego has really stepped up, particularly around coastal resiliency. And so we're able to see a lot of leadership talking to one another in that sense. And in some ways, I'm really grateful that I get to travel around the country and around the world because it's a really wonderful place to be, but I recognize not every community, not every state gets to have this type of leadership. And so how can I be part of a conversation where maybe the topic is a little crunchier, where you can't say climate change, you have to say changing climate.
That brings me to a sort of a hot take we were discussing earlier, but you were mentioning to me that you were surprisingly, at least according to sort of media perception, Florida has been taking some strong strides under DeSantis. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Right. Yeah, I was lamenting, I hate to give it any light, but I was lamenting the DeSantis recent ad about God needed a protector and he reached down and identified this individual. I find that hard to believe, but I will say this. There's a significant amount of funding that the state of Florida has given to its communities to be more resilient in the face of impacts from a changing climate. I don't know that they would say it's climate change, but a changing climate. And I will also say this. There are two things happening around the world that often get intertwined but are different. One are disasters, like a hurricane. Hurricane Ian hit Florida, Tropical Storm Nicole. The way we respond as policymakers, the way the insurance companies respond is very different than the incremental changes that you're seeing from greenhouse gas emissions, which translate into rising waters, melting glaciers, changing temperatures. But they all come together, right? One of the reasons that the scientists from NOAA and NIMS have said one of the reasons Hurricane Ian was so illustrious is because the average temperature of the Gulf has risen 3 degrees in the last 20 years. And that was sort of unexpected. But when you have the cold air hitting the warmer water, it creates higher wind impacts. And so, Florida is surprisingly doing a lot of really great work. I have some colleagues in Florida, particularly Dr. Jennifer Hirado in Southeast Florida, CJ Reynolds in Tampa, Whit Raymer in Tampa. They're doing amazing, amazing work around resilience and looking forward towards how they can be more sustainable.
Makes sense. That's great to hear. Talk about other countries. So, I mean, look, I'm sure like Denmark's doing great. I saw some presentations recently. It's a small country, but how about sort of big countries? Where are you seeing innovation? Where are you seeing things that we could learn here in the States?
Yeah, I think the two biggest ones for me are Portugal and France. So Sausalito has a number of sister cities. One of them is Cascais, Portugal, which is just south of Lisbon. So this summer, I got invited to be on a panel at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon. And while I was there, I was able to travel down to Cascais and meet my counterparts in their civil government there. And they have really forward-thinking plans around sustainable tourism, a blue economy, ocean cleanup, coastal erosion, and ocean health. They're putting together a plan that is phased, that is well researched, and has a lot of support from the government, both locally and internationally. And in France, I think I told you this earlier, I've been invited on Saturday. I'm actually heading to Paris. I'm invited to speak at the AMF, which is the Association of French Mayors. And I'll meet with the U.S. ambassador to France, Ambassador Denise Bauer. And then I'll go over to the Congress and be on a panel about how do you finance the protection of nature. And that's this idea of the blue economy. And then I'll be on another panel with the mayor of Chattha, France, and he heads up 14 municipalities that have come together in aggregate to have a regional approach to climate issues. But all this travel has shown me that we may speak different languages in different parts of the world, but wow, we are truly in it together. We have to be, and so many of the issues are the same.
Thank you for that. And I want to come back a little bit to sort of the founders and sort of company building, I guess, in this space. So what are some of the lessons that you would share? If somebody wants to work with the city of Sausalito, somebody has a particular startup that fits in with your sort of narrative, what would be the steps they should go through?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of public funding. And so oftentimes an entity can identify public funding that would be useful for them, but they need a 501c3 or a municipality to be a partner. So figure out that funding source and then find your municipality and make that pitch to them based on what their priorities might be. And so when Intertie said, we want to help you with EV chargers, both on land and on the water, that made sense. When another company, Rain Ions, came and said, we want to help with mitigating air pollution and work with your inventors and your maritime experts around exhaust and mitigating those impacts, that made sense. We've had some folks approach us recently around desalination, doing small scale as an experiment since we are a waterfront. So I think it's having, again, it's like that product market fit. What does that community need? And then the other side of it is, who's the champion in that community? Do you have someone that you can talk to? Does the community have a policy around a blue economy, around smart cities? And for the record, that concentric circle between smart cities and blue economy is so bright to me. It's hard for me to separate them sometimes in my head. In fact, we were looking at applying for a grant to repave our streets with rubberized asphalt because the Department of Transportation had started to do some studies around the ability of rubberized asphalt to sequester carbon and to mitigate the impacts from flooding. So if I can lay down infrastructure that's going to sequester carbon, and I know a startup that's working on that, I want to see it. That fits into my investment thesis.
And what's the information distribution right now? Is this just a situation, just Google it? Is it go to the website to see what projects you're interested in? Like, how do people find that fit?
That's a great question. You do have to roll up your sleeves and do a little legwork. I think it's not that difficult to figure out parts of the country, parts of the world where it's applicable. So I do a lot of mentoring for the German accelerator. And one of my companies is a biochar company. And in California, our utilities are trimming vegetation in large amounts, right, for wildfire prevention. That means we have biomass that can be put through the biochar process. Well, that's a great market. That's a great product market fit. We have a need. We have ongoing biomass to fit into the biochar, right? And so I think there's sort of regulatory drivers that helped impact that. So that's what I tell a lot of my startups. Look for regulatory drivers. Did a state or a country pass a particular type of law outlawing something, regulating something, mandating something? And then look for some of the National Science Fund grants that are out there, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Bill, some of the energy commissions in your states. They all have funding and research mechanisms. But those are, I think, often forgotten when we think about product market fit. We think about, is there a consumer who will buy it? But if you have a regulatory driver, like think about like data when GDPR came to light, and then California had a commensurate data protection law. That made California very advantageous for those who want to get into data protection.
Great analogy. What startups would you be building right now if you weren't doing what you're doing? Like, now that you know what's out there, now you know the problems and the gaps, what should founders be building right now?
So full disclosure, I don't always go towards the quickest dollar signs, but for largest climate impact, I would be all in on ocean health, decarbonization. So two ways, right? So the oceans are our largest carbon sink. We can create all sorts of ways to sequester carbon and develop them, bring them to market, get people to buy them, or we can clean up our oceans. They're right here. They want to help us. And so we need to really start respecting our oceans and recognize that this interplay, that if we help our oceans, they also can help us. And then I guess from a product, if I was developing an actual product around that, whether it's something that reduces acidification, plastic cleanup, helps species, that would be the direction I'd go in. I'd also look, as I've said a couple times now, around products that aid in decarbonization. So if you think about those large ships that we see coming through the mouth of the Golden Gate, the Maersk, the Casco Busans, they put out the equivalent of 30 million cars of greenhouse gas emissions every year. One ship, 30 million vehicles. So I would love one ship, right? So how do we decarbonize our shipping industry? How do we decarbonize our ports? When I was campaigning to run for council, I had a concept, it's a floating microgrid. And the idea, because we had just had these massive fires out in Point Reyes, and the firefighters had trouble getting to some of those areas, but they could have maybe floated in. And so the idea was that we would take a barge, we would load the barge up with solar panels for generation. We would use a startup's technology that we had here in Sausalito that was a coolant that would increase the efficiency while reducing the energy costs. And then we would be able to have that ready to deploy if somebody needed an energy source. And you're seeing this in Amsterdam. They, I think, are going to electrify all canal vessels by 2025. And they're also working towards electrifying their port so that they don't have these ships idling. And so the idea is this floating microgrid could float out to a ship, to a smaller type of vessel. And instead of idling with a dirty, noisy diesel generator, you can use green energy.
Wow. Awesome. All right, great. Well, by the way, I noticed your pin on your jacket. What is that pin?
Yes, so I'm proudly wearing 2 pins today. I'm extremely, extremely honored to be a member of the Sausalito City Council. And so I have my City Council pin, but I also, today's reminder, this is my Get Shit Done Club pin. So if you would like to be a part of my Get Shit Done Club, let me know. Let me know how you get shit done, and we'll get you an honorary membership.
I would like a membership. I don't know where I apply, but
you should have like a hat and a jacket. You should have the whole outfit.
Let's go. Let's do it. I need to get shit done. Like, Yeti cup. I'm ready.
You do already though. Think about it.
Yes. Awesome. Well, tell me about like some other thoughts you have on some big things happening in the world. So the Inflammation Reduction Act, because that probably speaks more to politics being inflamed, but the Inflation Reduction Act. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting, important act. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is the single most significant congressional contribution in our lifetime because it has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% or more by 2030. The issue will be, how do we distribute those funds? Do we get caught up in these green banks? Do we not know how to put that money in the hands of the inventors and the entrepreneurs? But the other really interesting thing about the Inflation Reduction Act is I actually think it's a national security measure. A long time ago before law school, I actually worked at the Woodrow Wilson Center at the Smithsonian on the Mall in DC on a small research project that looked at the links between environmental degradation and national security issues. And nobody at that time, late 90s, it wasn't really a hot topic. And now I believe it's really come full circle, because if we don't bring the ability to manufacture alternate sources of energy, renewable energy, if we don't take that out of the hands of Russia and China, then we won't be able to have that type of energy independence that we know we so desperately need, right? And so we need a green industrial revolution, but we need it in order to preserve democracy for long term so that we're not beholden to another country for our energy production.
Makes sense. And tell me a little bit about that sort of like tapping into those funds and how it gets distributed. Like, what is the best way for startups to think about approaching that? Like, is it lobbyists? Are there consulting firms? Like, is it just straight up go to websites and apply?
I think straight up go to websites and apply. So what they have right now is 29 or $27 billion is going into a green bank. They're trying to figure out how that green bank will be allocated, how those funds will come out of the green banks. It's being administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. And so the idea is that there'll be this bucket of money for entrepreneurs to come and be able to access. And it's amazing things. It's like innovations around low carbon cement and steel, innovations around low carbon production of primary materials like products and paper, things that really get to the basic infrastructure of our everyday lives, what you're writing on, what you're driving on. If we can make those things low carbon and also sequester carbon, then we really can start to meet some of these ambitious goals. And so these green funds will be really important. Several states like Connecticut and New York already have green funds. So what I'm hearing from my DC friends is that some of the monies made get distributed into these existing entities because they're up and running already. And that way we won't have to wait 2 years to see this come to fruition.
That's awesome. All right. So just kind of to wrap up a little bit, were there any particular thoughts that we didn't discuss around sort of scaling climate startups right now. And we talked a little bit about how to access funds. We talked a little bit about how to sort of coordinate with governments. What else could you share in terms of what founders should be thinking about in terms of best practices to sort of achieve these goals that you set up?
So one is practical and one is more existential, right? So the practical one, this is sort of an untapped well, is insurance companies. Munich Re, Swiss Re, AXA, Guy Carpenter, they are all massively reinventing insurance products around parametric insurance, the predictability of weather events and weather patterns. And this means if you're a data scientist, if you are working on AI, you're working on VR, you want to be able to do something around climate tech that has a real life impact. You know, I met someone from Munich Re Ventures a couple of weeks ago, and the type of work they're doing in the energy space is really, really important. But a lot of folks don't think about the insurance sector as being innovative. And so I would just say they very much are. My friends in that space really want to see new products come to market, and they want to be inspired by entrepreneurs. So think about next time you're looking at some type of accelerator, think about some of those companies. They're not normally on the radar, but they really can help you with financing, with product market fit, and with really making a difference. So that's a sort of a practical hint that I've seen recently that I think is really important. The other is my existential that I think you're giving me a chance to talk about ikigai, because I have a lot of people in my network who want to do something big, but they're not quite sure because they make good money, not crazy money. They like their job, but they don't love it. They're good at some things, but not really quite sure. And so I've been very much inspired by the Japanese philosophy around ikigai, which is this idea that you should find the things that you love and that you, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and then what you're good at. And then throughout that thread, you find your passion, your mission, your profession, and your vocation. And they come together in this philosophy called ikigai. And if you can find this sense of purpose, and I got to tell you, I mean, there's a time in my life where I didn't have a sense of purpose. I had a great job, I had a great education, I had good money, but I didn't have a sense of purpose. And finding it has really, really been motivating.
Amazing. Janelle, you make me so proud to be a Marin County resident.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for sharing these insights with this next generation of entrepreneurs and company builders and government officials and people that want to get involved in their community. It's been amazing. So looking forward to more interaction together and collaboration. And thanks to you again for the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks, you guys.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Climb by VSC. Thank you so much for watching and listening. A few quick shout outs before you go. Our thanks to Mayor Janelle Kellman for sharing her time, energy, and passion for climate resilience with us. You can read more about her work at janellekellman.com. Special thanks to Credo for their help in producing and promoting this episode. To visit any part of today's conversation, you can find the full transcript on vscventures.com. Our thanks to Josue Ramiro for posting those every week. Lastly, if you've listened this far, please leave us a rating on Spotify or review on iTunes. It only takes a few seconds, really helps us out, and as far as I know, it's still carbon neutral. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you next week on Climb by VSC.